The first time my neighbor pointed a shotgun at my brother, it was over a mailbox. Not drugs, not money, not some drunken midnight fight, just a black metal mailbox sitting beside a gravel road in rural Montana. And the terrifying part wasn't even the gun itself. It was the look in Earl Donahue's eyes while he held it. Calm, certain, like somewhere along the line, this 72-year-old rancher had convinced himself that threatening people with a firearm over 6 inches of property line made perfect sense. My little brother Mason stood there frozen beside his truck holding a bag of cattle feed, while Earl yelled, "Move that damn box again, and I'll bury both of you on my side of the fence." Looking back now, I think that was the exact moment our whole town split in half. Because people love pretending neighbor disputes stay small, but out in isolated places, where pride and land get tangled together for generations, tiny conflicts have a way of turning poisonous real fast. My family had lived outside Alder Ridge, Montana since before I was born. Our father, Calvin Mercer, raised cattle on 200 rough acres of windy pastureland tucked between hills that turned gold every September. Life out there wasn't glamorous. Winters were brutal. Internet barely worked half the time. Everybody knew everybody's business before breakfast. But it was home. Dad used to say rural communities survive because people trust each other more than institutions. Funny enough, this whole story proved the opposite. Earl Donahue owned the neighboring ranch east of ours. Old school guy, Vietnam veteran, widower, mean as barbed wire even on good days. But growing up, our families actually got along all right. Earl and Dad traded tools sometimes, shared fencing costs. Once Earl even helped pull our truck out of a snowbank during a blizzard. That's what made everything so confusing later, because hatred rarely starts from nothing. Usually it grows from old resentment nobody notices until it's already rotting through the floorboards. Things changed after my father died from a heart attack. Suddenly the ranch fell onto me and Mason while we were both still figuring out our own lives. I just turned 34. Mason was 26 and stubborn enough to argue with thunderstorms. We tried keeping the ranch afloat, but financially, we were drowning quietly. Beef prices dropped. Equipment repairs stacked up. Then a development company started sniffing around Alder Ridge offering ridiculous money for ranch properties because wealthy out-of-state buyers suddenly wanted authentic mountain living. Half the county started selling land. Earl absolutely hated it. City parasites, he called them constantly. They buy scenery then destroy the people who belong there first. Honestly, part of me understood his anger. But grief and bitterness had started twisting him into somebody harder every year after his wife passed. He stopped attending church, stopped waving at neighbors, started fighting with almost everybody about fences, easements, grazing paths, anything. Then came the mailbox issue. Sounds stupid now saying it out loud. Our old mailbox post finally rotted through after heavy snow. So Mason replaced it with a new one slightly farther down the road where the ground stayed firmer during winter. Problem was, Earl believed the new placement crossed onto his side of the property line by maybe half a foot. 6 inches. That's what this whole nightmare started over. At first Mason tried handling it calmly. "We'll move it if survey records say we're wrong," he told Earl one morning. Earl spat tobacco into the dirt and muttered, "Survey records got rewritten by thieves years ago." That should have been the warning sign, honestly. Because once somebody stops believing objective facts, every disagreement becomes personal warfare. Over the next few weeks, Earl escalated constantly. He knocked the mailbox over twice with his tractor. Once he dragged it into the ditch entirely. Mason kept reinstalling it because, technically, county records showed the placement was legal. But each time tensions got worse. One afternoon, I drove over after hearing shouting and found Earl standing near the roadside, holding a rifle, while Mason screamed back at him across the fence. "You threatening my brother?" I yelled, climbing out of the truck. Earl stared at me coldly. "I'm protecting my land." "From a mailbox?" He pointed the rifle barrel toward the dirt. "From disrespect." That word hung in the air weirdly after he said it. Respect. Out there, respect means more than law sometimes. More than logic, too. Men will bankrupt themselves protecting pride they can't even properly explain. Things might have cooled off eventually if other neighbors hadn't started taking sides. Some folks supported us because county maps clearly favored our property line. Others sided with Earl because his family had lived there longer and people pitted him after years alone. Local diners turned into gossip battlegrounds. Church conversations got awkward. Even the feed store owner warned Mason one day, "Donahue's losing his grip lately. You boys need to be careful." Then came the county survey. Official crews arrived to settle the dispute permanently, and Earl absolutely lost his mind watching them place markers near the road. I'll never forget him screaming at those workers while wind whipped across the pasture. "You people think paper owns land?" he yelled. "Paper ain't buried out here. People are." And standing there watching him unravel, I realized this fight had stopped being about boundaries a long time ago. Earl wasn't protecting property anymore. He was protecting the last piece of control left in his entire life. After the county survey crews placed those markers near the road, the entire atmosphere around Alder Ridge changed. You could feel it everywhere. At the gas station, the diner, Sunday church parking lots. People stopped talking about the dispute like it was some dumb neighbor argument and started treating it like a loyalty test. And honestly, small towns are dangerous that way sometimes. Everybody claims they hate drama, but deep down people love choosing sides because it gives them purpose. Mason handled it badly at first. Not violently or anything, just emotionally. Every time Earl knocked the mailbox over, Mason rebuilt it bigger. New steel post, concrete base, reflective numbers. "If he wants a war over a mailbox," he muttered one night while tightening bolts in the garage, "I'll build the damn Fort Knox of mailboxes." I laughed at the time, but deep down I was worried. Because Earl wasn't acting rational anymore. Rational people don't patrol fence lines at midnight with binoculars. Rational people don't sit outside county meetings muttering about conspiracies while drinking gas station coffee from the same stained thermos every day. The worst part? I don't think Earl even realized how unstable he'd become. He genuinely believed he was defending something sacred. A week after the survey, we found one of our calves dead near the eastern fence line. Now look, cattle die sometimes. That's ranch life. But this felt wrong immediately. No predator marks. No illness signs. Just the animal lying there stiff beside a broken section of fence Earl had been complaining about for months. Mason exploded the second he saw it. "That old bastard did this. You don't know that. You really still giving him the benefit of the doubt?" Truthfully, no, I wasn't. But accusing an armed neighbor of killing livestock without proof in a town already boiling with tension? That's how people end up on true crime documentaries. We buried the calf quietly and repaired the fence ourselves. But after that, sleep got harder. Every truck engine outside at night made me check the window. Mason started carrying his pistol constantly. Even our dogs acted nervous near the eastern pasture. Then came the fire. Somebody torched our hay storage shed around 2 in the morning during a windstorm. Flames lit up the hills like sunrise while Mason and I ran through smoke, trying to save equipment before the propane tanks blew. Volunteer firefighters arrived fast enough to stop the blaze spreading to the barn, but the shed itself was destroyed completely. Standing there afterward watching ash drift across wet dirt, I noticed Earl's truck parked down the road near his fence line. Engine off. Just sitting there. Watching. Sheriff deputies questioned everybody the next morning, including Earl. He acted offended anybody would even suspect him. "You boys got more enemies than common sense," he told us flatly. "Maybe one of those developers wants your land cheaper." And honestly, the terrifying thing is he almost sounded believable. That's how twisted the situation had become. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. Still, the sheriff privately warned us afterward that Earl had become increasingly volatile over the past year. Noise complaints, threatening arguments, trespassing accusations against hikers who never existed. One deputy admitted quietly, "Man's unraveling since his wife died." That sentence stuck with me because grief explained so much of Earl's behavior, but it didn't excuse any of it. Pain can make people cruel if they stop seeing others as human. Around that same time, a developer named Lucas Vane approached us directly offering nearly $4 million for the ranch. $4 million. More money than Mason and I had ever imagined seeing in our lives. Enough to erase debt, start over somewhere easier, maybe finally breathe again. Mason wanted to refuse immediately. Dad would hate us selling. But I wasn't so certain anymore. Keeping the ranch felt less like preserving family legacy and more like surviving a siege. One night, I sat alone on the porch staring across the dark pasture thinking about Dad. About how proud he'd been of that land. About how exhausted we'd become trying to protect it. And for the first time in my life, I understood how people slowly give away things they once swore they'd die defending. Not because they stop loving them, because eventually constant conflict wears holes through your spirit. Then Earl crossed a line nobody could ignore. Mason was driving home from town late one evening when he found the road blocked near the eastern fence. Earl stood there beside his truck holding a shotgun under the headlights. "Turn around," he told Mason. Mason thought he was bluffing until Earl aimed the barrel directly at the windshield. "You boys keep poisoning this valley," Earl shouted, "selling pieces of it to outsiders." Mason backed the truck up and called me, shaking with rage. Sheriff deputies arrested Earl that night for aggravated assault. You'd think the town would finally turn against him after that. Some people did. Others blamed us somehow. "Old Earl's just protecting what matters," one guy muttered at the diner afterward. Protecting what matters. Amazing how quickly communities romanticize dangerous behavior when nostalgia gets involved. Earl got released pending charges a few days later, and somehow, that made things even worse. Because humiliation mixed with isolation creates ugly desperation in people already losing touch with reality. He stopped shaving, stopped maintaining his ranch. Neighbors reported hearing him yelling outside alone at night. One woman claimed he fired warning shots at survey flags near the road. Then winter arrived early. Heavy snow buried the valley and cut most outside contact for nearly a week. During storms like that, rural Montana feels less like America and more like another planet entirely. White silence everywhere, roads disappearing beneath drifts, isolation swallowing everything whole. And trapped inside that isolation, tensions kept building. One evening, the power cut out across half the valley after ice knocked down transmission lines. Mason and I sat inside the dark farmhouse feeding logs into the wood stove when somebody started pounding on the front door. Hard. Violent. We grabbed flashlights and opened it carefully. Earl stood there covered in snow, breathing heavily, eyes bloodshot and wild. For one strange second, he actually looked scared instead of angry. "They're trying to take it," he muttered. "All of it." I smelled whiskey immediately. "Earl," I said carefully, "you need to go home." He pointed toward the eastern hills. "Developers, county people, all thieves." Then his face twisted suddenly. "And your family helped them." Mason stepped forward instantly. "Get off our property." Earl looked at him with this deep, ugly hatred I still see sometimes in dreams. "Your father would be ashamed of both of you." That almost triggered a fight right there. But before anything escalated further, Earl stumbled backward into the snow and laughed. This broken, exhausted laugh that honestly sounded more sad than threatening. "Land never belongs to cowards," he muttered before disappearing back into the storm. The next morning, we woke up to sirens echoing across the valley. The sirens that morning sounded strange through fresh snow, muffled almost, like the whole valley was trying to soften whatever bad thing had happened overnight. Mason looked at me across the kitchen immediately because both of us already knew where those sirens were heading. Earl's ranch. We threw jackets on and drove through half-plowed roads toward the eastern property while sheriff trucks and an ambulance crawled ahead through the storm. And honestly, even after everything that happened between our families, part of me still hoped we were wrong. Maybe a barn collapse. Maybe a heart attack. Anything except what my gut already feared. Earl's truck sat sideways near the old equipment shed with the driver door hanging open. Deputies moved quietly around the property, speaking in low voices while snow drifted across boot prints. One of the officers I recognized from town saw us approaching and immediately stepped forward. His expression told me everything before he even opened his mouth. "We found him near the ridge pasture around dawn," he said carefully. "Single gunshot wound." Mason went still beside me. "Jesus Christ." The deputy rubbed his gloves together against the cold. "Looks self-inflicted." I wish I could tell you I felt anger hearing that, or relief, or vindication after months of chaos. But standing there looking across Earl Donohue's ranch while snow-buried fence posts and cattle wandered silently through white fields, mostly I just felt tired. Deep tired. The kind that settles into your bones after watching somebody slowly destroy themselves in public while nobody figures out how to stop it. News spread across Alder Ridge within hours. By lunchtime, people had already split into camps again. Some blamed the county for escalating the dispute. Others blamed us. A few blamed the developers. But most people, if they were being honest, blamed Earl and then immediately felt guilty about it. Because death has a weird way of polishing rough memories. Suddenly, folks who spent years avoiding Earl at church started talking about him, like some tragic folk hero protecting old Montana values. That part bothered me more than I expected. Not because Earl deserved hatred after dying, he didn't, but because people kept rewriting the story into something cleaner than reality. Earl wasn't some noble cowboy crushed by modern progress. He was a lonely, grieving man who let paranoia and pride consume him until every disagreement started feeling like war. And if nobody admits that part, then nobody learns anything from what happened. A few days later, we attended the funeral out of respect. Small service. Freezing cold morning. About half the valley showed up wearing heavy coats and uncomfortable expressions. Earl's daughter came in from Idaho with her husband and 2 little boys. I'd only met her once years earlier. She looked emotionally exhausted the way people do after spending too much time preparing themselves for bad news that still hurts anyway. After the burial, she approached me quietly near the church steps. "Dad talked about your family constantly," she admitted. I didn't know how to answer that. She stared out toward the snow-covered road for a long moment before continuing. "He wasn't always like this." And man, that sentence hit hard. Because somewhere underneath all the threats and rage and guns and lawsuits, there had once been a normal man who loved his wife and helped neighbors during snowstorms and probably laughed easier than anybody remembered anymore. That version just got buried under too much bitterness for too long. About a month after the funeral, Mason and I finally made our decision about the ranch. We sold part of the northern acreage to the developers. Not all of it, never all. Just enough to clear debts, repair equipment, and stop living one bad season away from collapse. Some neighbors judged us for it immediately. Others understood. Funny thing is, after everything with Earl, I stopped caring so much about public opinion. Small towns will always build stories around your choices no matter what you do. Stay and struggle? You're stubborn. Sell and survive? You're greedy. People mostly just project their own fears onto other people's lives. Still, we protected the core land. The house. The pastures. Dad's barn. The ridge overlooking the valley where he used to drink coffee every sunrise. Some things deserved preserving. Others, honestly, didn't. That realization changed me more than the conflict itself. Because before all this, I used to think legacy meant holding on to everything forever no matter the cost. But legacy without peace eventually turns into a prison. One evening the following spring, Mason and I rebuilt the mailbox one last time near the road. Same black metal box. Same gravel shoulder. Except this time, we placed it exactly on the survey marker line just to remove any future argument entirely. While tightening the bolts, Mason suddenly laughed under his breath. Hard to believe people almost died over this stupid thing. I looked out across the valley then, snow finally melting, cattle moving slowly through green pasture returning after winter, wind rolling through open land that honestly didn't care about human pride at all. "Wasn't really about the mailbox," I said quietly. Mason nodded because by then we both understood. It had been about fear. Fear of losing identity. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that the world was changing too fast and leaving certain people behind. Earl just happened to lose that battle louder than most. Sometimes I still think about the last thing he said standing in that snowstorm outside our house. "Land never belongs to cowards." Back then I thought it was just drunken anger talking. Now, I think maybe he was trying to convince himself he hadn't already surrendered to his own loneliness years earlier. And honestly, that's the real tragedy in stories like this, not the lawsuits or threats or even the violence. It's watching somebody become so consumed by resentment that they stop recognizing the people who once cared about them. So tell me what you think. Do you believe Earl was ultimately a victim of grief and isolation, or did he cross too many lines for sympathy to matter anymore? And if you were in our position, would you have kept fighting to hold every acre of family land no matter the cost, or sold part of it the way we eventually did? Let me know in the comments, because conflicts like this always reveal how differently people define pride, survival, and justice once family legacy gets involved.